Good afternoon, everybody. Please be patient as we allow just a few more registrants to log in, and we'll get started in just a few minutes. Thank you for being here this afternoon. All right, we'll go and get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being present today for this webinar. We have some excellent speakers today that are joining us with our two panelists along with myself that we will shortly introduce you to. Just some housekeeping items before we get started, just real quickly. The ABCP has awarded us with 1.2 Category 1 CEUs. Thank you, Al and Maggie, for submitting this for us. In order for you to receive this credit, please make sure you stay logged in for a minimum of 45 minutes, and you have to complete the presentation survey that you see up here on the screen. This is just shows you the letter that we got from ABCP, but make sure you do complete the survey at the end of the presentation, the webinar. And those will be mailed to you, emailed to you within a week. We will also be posting this live recorded presentation on YouTube in the near future. So please do keep a lookout for those too. Please complete a very brief survey post-webinar. Again, this is important that you complete so that you do get your CEU certificate. And again, this will be emailed to you within a few weeks. Again, you can see from what we have up here on the slide, they're very simple three question survey, so it does not take that much time. So please do complete this. We also take your feedback very as important as we improve upon. And then you'll get an email that you see on the right side regarding downloading your certificate or viewing your certificate and printing it for future credit for your ABCP. Before we introduce our speakers today, please note that all discussions that will take place in the Q&A window, we will review questions and share those with the group for the discussion purposes. If you do see questions that are similar to yours or one that you feel is really good, please vote it up so that the question will move up to the top and our panelists of moderators will present those to the speakers. Also, I want to thank our panel of moderators with me today. They are Karen Lambert, our Vice President of Perfusion in East Region. Karen's been a perfusionist for a very long time. She's also been with specialty care a very long time. She's held multiple positions, including Region President in the Eastern Region. Our second panelist along with me is Chelsea Capone. She's our Chief Perfusionist in Georgia. She has done both adult perfusion as well as pediatric perfusion. I am Kirti Patel. I'm the Vice President as well for the West Region. I've been a perfusionist for also 25 years. Been with specialty care a little bit over 3 years. So please, again, for the discussions, just keep in mind everybody's muted. So please, along the presentations as they're going, please put your questions in the Q&A box so that we can address all your questions at the end of the session. All right. Karen and Chelsea, if you don't mind introducing our speakers. Our first speaker is going to be Shannon. Karen, if you could please introduce our speaker.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kirti. It's my pleasure to introduce everyone to Shannon Barletti. I had the pleasure of meeting Shannon when she was a perfusion student at Jefferson in Philadelphia. Shannon's been a nurse for, I think, about 10 years now, critical care just a few years later, and then CCP in 2020, and currently working on her master's, which I think she'll finish up next year. When Shannon was a full-time associate with specialty care, she worked on so many task force and work groups and committees. I know that she has co-authored several research articles dealing with COVID ECMO, and most recently this past year participated in the AMSEC Leadership Symposium. She currently works for Abbott Acute Product Consultant for CentraMag. So we appreciate Shannon's input with such a wide array of experience in different areas.
Thank you so much, Karen. And thank you, Al, Curdy, Chelsea, and everybody at Specialty Care for having me. These are my disclosures before we begin. Like Karen said, I am employed, just recently resigned as a full-time perfusionist with Specialty Care, and I am now an acute product consultant with Abbott. And this is really, tonight, the content and the opinions that I'm going to present, they're completely my own. I'm not here as an employee of any company, and I have absolutely no financial incentives or interests relevant to this presentation. Thank you. So in my search for this, because we've seen throughout the last couple of years, a large trend in healthcare of a lot of employees, whether they be nursing, perfusion, respiratory, moving from full-time positions into more part-time or per diem positions. While I wasn't able to find any real published data on perfusion data for this, I did find quite a lot of nursing data for this. And I think that while they're not entirely the same, we can certainly draw some parallels. Hospitals and healthcare facilities across the country have really struggled to find staff to fill most all positions, especially with the increased number of patients during COVID and peak pandemic levels. Many of the healthcare professionals, including perfusionists, have made the difficult decision to leave their tenured full-time positions for a per diem role, mostly due to flexibility or travel, where they could sometimes make double their salary as a traveler and really make their own schedules. With such a shortage of trained and experienced staff, the salary sky seemed to be the limit for a healthcare professional willing to travel. These are some quotes for an article that was published in MedPage today. It reports that 9 out of 10 healthcare facilities, 88% of those surveyed, use locum tenens to provide staffing shortages in the last year alone. They sent out 20,000 surveys to hospitals, medical groups, and received 202 responses. So the healthcare executives and managers who responded to the survey also shared that they've had to be creative to recruit and retain staff. 54% of respondents said that they've used incentives like sign-on bonuses, while 49% reported instituting new retention efforts such as retention bonuses. It has not only been a problem to obtain staff, but also to keep it. The field of perfusion is not exempt from these trends. The perfusion job landscape is drastically different than just 2.5 years ago. Whereas just a few years ago, a graduate perfusionist may have to consider relocating to secure a job post-graduation, today, especially perfusionists with experience have many different opportunities in many different areas all across the country. Next slide. Thanks, Curdy. So there was also some data on travel nurse contract trends in 2021, 2022. And I know this isn't perfusion data, but again, it was really difficult to locate with such a wide range of salaries and opportunities being offered. Nursing was the easiest way to go to get some nice concrete published data. So this is from the article, Has the Travel Nursing Bubble Burst?, which was published in May of 2022 on Advisory Board. We're starting to see a lot of debate now as to whether or not the big surge for trained perfusionists and nurses is really dwindling down now that we're seeing the severe hospitalized cases and ECMO numbers of COVID decline. The travel nursing industry has doubled in size from 2021 to 2022. And with that, the nursing revenue tripled from about $3.9 billion for that travel nursing to $11.8 billion. The average pay for travel nurses per week in December of 2019, just before the pandemic hit, was about $1,706. The average travel pay for nurses per week in December of 2021 was $3,290. It was almost double what it had been pre-COVID. So now that we're seeing fewer hospitalizations, along with the loss of state COVID-19 funding, we're also seeing more new full-time hires as opposed to the per diem and traveling hires. This article was very interesting, and it was very, very sad because a big part of the article was discussing that hospitals, because of the lack of income, are having to negotiate lower contract rates with staffing agencies, some by as much as 50%. And that has really put a lot of these travel nurses in a very, very difficult situation. So I know that this picture on the left probably looks very familiar to you as a perfusionist or an ECMO specialist as a nurse, right? It's actually me trying to maintain my work-life balance. But in all seriousness, working long hours, overnights, weekends, unpredictable schedules, last-minute changes in the OR schedule, those are all very much a part of the life of a perfusionist or an ECMO specialist. Constantly trying to juggle the many different roles and hats so many of us wear in life, whether it's at work or at home, all while knowing the entire apple cart could be toppled at any moment should they get a phone call and get called into work. The way that individuals view work-life balance now in a post-COVID world is very different. We see a lot about, instead of work-life balance, trying to achieve more of a work-life integration. The photo on the right seems much more simple. It prioritizes the self and family above work, which I myself can say I did not do for many years prior to COVID. Work was very much my primary focus. As Karen said, I was very passionate, involved in so much, and my personal life had no choice but to just fit into whatever space and time I had left over after everything else. In the news, we hear of many different companies and jobs switching from the full 5-day work week over to either a 4-day work week, either a fully work from home option, or maybe even a work from home 1-day option to allow for more flexibility in scheduling and to ease some of the burnout experienced by so many over the last 2 years. But what about the healthcare workers? What about the perfusionists who can't pump a case from their couch, or the ECMO specialist who can't do rounds from the comfort of their kitchen? How do they find that work-life integration that so many are looking for right now? For so many of them, it has been to resign from their full-time positions and seek positions as either per diem or travel perfusionist. These are just some of the pros and cons that may exist between per diem and travel perfusion versus a full-time position. For a per diem or a travel perfusionist, many can make their own hours, sometimes many weeks or months in advance. Sometimes it feels much more like shift work where they are scheduled as opposed to a salaried full-time position that may vary from day to day and week to week. Some employers will allow travelers or per diems to have flexibility to work many days in a row and then kind of accumulate and plan their days off so that they may have, a couple of weeks off in a row. There have also been companies that you can be a full-time traveler. You are eligible for full-time benefits as you would be as a full-time employee, but you are a per diem and a traveler. Now, along with those pros, there are also cons, and as I'm sure Tim will get into this with his experiences later on both. But as from cons, you're not always guaranteed work as a per diem or as a traveler. You may have to travel far from home for assignments. For example, if you are not, if there's no work available at the hospital in which you were assigned, you may have to travel very far away to continue to meet your hour requirement. For some employers, they require that you live a certain number of miles from your travel assignment to avoid situations where per diem and traveler employees were switching to travel or per diem in their hometowns and really reaping the benefits of all of that extra compensation without really having to travel. As a per diem or a traveler, you cannot pick your assignment, and oftentimes it's very difficult just to jump right in and pick up, pump a case with a surgeon you've never worked with, do ECMO rounds with a team you've never met. And frequently, you're working in new environments with new surgeons, new staff, and for some that can be very uncomfortable. So this is a very interesting article that was published recently. Linda Mongero, Tammy Rosenthal, and Ashley Walczyk published it's a wonderful article in JECT that looks at a survey of women in the perfusion workforce in 2021 and compares it to a survey of women in perfusion that was done in 2011. For me, it was really fascinating to consider some of their survey results, especially those that reveal several stressors in difficulty in maintaining a work-life balance as a perfusionist, and the current trends towards per diem and travel perfusion. While this article looks specifically at women in perfusion, it's easy to imagine that these factors certainly weigh on all perfusionists as parents and caregivers and friends. The survey had 538 respondents, which is about 45% of all female CCPs in North America. Of those respondents, 75% are the sole financial providers for their family. 13% of those who responded were between ages 20 and 29. 41.9% were between 30 and 39 years old. That totals about 54.9% of female perfusionists surveyed in the age bracket below 40 years of age. 61.5% of all respondents report being under moderate stress. 94.3% take call on a regular basis. And very sadly, 74.1% report that they miss essential family functions due to work and call. 61% of the women surveyed had children, and of those, 76.4% had more than one child and continued working as a perfusionist while pregnant. Just less than 1% of those surveyed report taking 1 year of maternity leave. All took much, much less and returned back to work with full duties, including taking call. The article reports the average female perfusionist works more than 45 hours per week and spends an additional 30+ hours a week in unpaid tasks at home. The results of this survey, both percentages and figures drawn, give staggering quantitative values to the stressors of finding a work-life balance as a woman in perfusion. While many moms and dads have done so beautifully in the past, Purdy, Karen, the difficulties of trying to find a manageable perfusion work-life integration while planning for a family or parenting school-age children still living at home are undeniable. The topic is near and dear to my heart and played heavily in my decision to step down as a full-time perfusionist, despite being in a wonderful university hospital setting, which was incredibly fulfilling and really the greatest team that anybody could ask to work with. So these are some things that you might want to consider that you might not initially think of when you're considering travel or per diem versus full-time employment. Will you be a W-2 or a 1099 employee? And what implications does that have in terms of responsibilities, taxes, business licensing? How will you keep up your skills and meet CCP recertification requirements? How will you obtain health insurance for yourself? And if you need to do so, how will you obtain that health insurance for your family as well? Do you need to carry your own malpractice insurance, or will your provider provide it for you? This is not an exhaustive list, and I myself am certainly no expert on travel or per diem perfusion. If this is something that you're interested in, or you're considering per diem or travel perfusion, there was a very, very interesting presentation done at Sanibel on travel perfusion by Summer Pizzuti. She really took a deep dive into travel perfusion, and I think she went over a lot of things in great detail that would be very, very helpful. I think it's most definitely worth checking out, and I believe that you can access it on YouTube.
Thank you, Shannon. That was wonderful. I'd like to introduce Tim Buzzelli. He has been a perfusionist since 1984, and during the first part of his career, he was served roles as a staff and chief perfusionist. Since 2013, though, he transitioned to locums. So today he is presenting his experience as a per diem perfusionist. Thank you, Tim. Welcome.
Good to be here. And thank you, Shannon. That was a fantastic presentation. A lot of what I am going to talk about can fold into several of your topics. So thank you for setting me up like that. That was well done.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And again, I want to reiterate, my disclosure is the same as Shannon's. I've got no financial interest. I'm doing this completely on my own. And so that's my official disclosure. So one of the things I want to touch base on is the fact that when you enter in as and again, this is tertiary care. This is not OR. This is tertiary care, ECMO coverage. When you enter into certain environments, occasionally, most of the time when you come on board as a locum tenens ECMO, you're greeted, you're welcomed, you're embraced, certainly by your perfusion colleagues, oftentimes by the staff. But sometimes the reality of these situations are that you're not necessarily embraced, and sometimes there's a little bit of even some pushback that you might encounter, and that is for anybody who's interested in doing this, either may perhaps have already experienced this or are considering locum tenens ECMO as an ECMO specialist and as a CCP or otherwise. You can occasionally expect to go into an environment that is sometimes just a little bit south of unfriendly, and I want to be sure that I want to get across that there's a reality to that, and it might surprise some people, but there are units and there are staff they're tired, they're overworked, they are frustrated, they're not happy with sometimes the extensive care that the ECMO patients require, and you are not necessarily part of the solution. You're part of that problem. And the rule number one that I make sure that I always convey to others who are very frustrated when encountering those situations. Rule number one is my ABP rule, which is always be professional. So when you encounter those situations, you're always be professional, and don't let those situations or those curmudgeons knock you off your game. You're there to do a job. You're there to be a clinician. So maintain that expertise. You always want to try to get along with staff. Occasionally, you're going to run into individuals within that group that actually want to learn. And that's a great opportunity to take what you know and what you have confidence in and teach. But the reality is, when you are up against a unit or some pushback, there's probably only 10 or 15% of those that group, and it's generally a group. It's generally the entire group that you sometimes run into. There's maybe 10 or 15% that are really going to embrace, and most of the time, although you would like to explain the pharmacodynamics of extracorporeal life support, the staff doesn't have any interest in that whatsoever. It would help for you to do your job and to take care of that patient, and to convey what needs to get done, perhaps. But the staff just doesn't want to have any part of that. But occasionally you'll catch the staff member that does, and it's great to embrace that, to use what you know to teach, and to help that person learn. And that is looked upon very favorably by the doctors, especially by the physicians. They see that, and then they really appreciate the fact that you're going that extra mile against sometimes a difficult current, which they know is there, and that's just work, and that's negotiation somewhat to try and work with that staff, and get them to buy in, is often the term used for a long-term ECMO support. Oftentimes, staff are not expecting the long-term care and the intensity and the length that these patients are going to be in the ICU. They're used to patients being in for 3 or 4 days, not 3 or 4 weeks or 3 or 4 months on ECMO support. They didn't get that when this was all presented to them, and they're frustrated by it. So it's great to be a part of being able to help those units to overcome some of that. But the reality is, you might face that type of an attitude. Be professional, stay on your game, and the message always is to be the clinician you need to be, in spite of maybe some pushback, and don't get frustrated. Just smile, always be professional, and plow ahead, and pass it on to any colleagues that may be sharing that same frustration of, this is a difficult place to work, and people aren't friendly. Well, that's the reality of things. It doesn't mean you have to be that way. It doesn't mean you compromise what you do. So I think that's really, really important. The second thing I wanted to touch base on is along those lines is to when you're in your situation, you walk into a new environment, someplace that you've never been before, someplace that somebody no one knows you. I sometimes encounter unusual circumstances right out of the gates. And I think, Curdy, have you got a slide there to present? And this is a situation, for example, that I walked into in a ICU where it was my first night there. This patient had been on ECMO for a day. So I was stepping into essentially the second or third shift, I think, of that patient care. Night shift on a Thursday leading into a weekend, a long 4-day weekend. So everybody was going to be difficult to get a hold of. And this is a crescent cannula. This is a diagram of what the company has for the proper cannulation technique, and this good diagram of how it should look. And then as I came to this patient and was looking over tip to tip, here's what I saw. Go ahead. I think the next one up. And this is what I encountered. So this had already been in the patient for about 24 hours. Patient was languishing with pulse oxes in the mid 80s, not quite doing as well as we were hoping. And I saw right away that, well, this was less than optimal placement of this cannula. So here I am, a new person in this environment, and you'll face this. You'll come into this, I'm sure, as we're on this web right now, as you will. What do? You certainly don't want to just turn your back and ignore it. It's a weekend. The physician is grumbling because he doesn't want to be bothered. The intensivists are super busy, and here you encounter this situation that you recognize should be addressed, obviously, but you have to do it very carefully. And there's no mistakes, there's no errors in this situation. It's just something that's not quite optimal, and that can be optimized by some intervention. And you want to be sure that no matter what, you carefully address these situations. You bring it up. That's what you're there for. And don't be uncomfortable because you just come in and nobody knows you. You don't know anybody else. You have to sort of compartmentalize, put that aside, focus on what you see and address it. And it's okay. It might be uncomfortable, but the staff will appreciate it. The intensivists, whoever you present this to, whether it's an intensivist or a PA or an NP, whoever is on board that shift, for your unit or your that patient specifically. If you present with knowledge, with confidence, and you're sure that, hey, I think we can adjust this, and we should be able to see some better numbers for our patient. I think she'll be doing a little bit better if a surgeon can make an adjustment. You bring it up. You at least bring it up for discussion, and then that's passed on. And in my situation, it was a holiday weekend. The physicians obviously did not want to be bothered, but it was addressed the next day, and it was addressed by a surgeon who did flip that so that the orientation was more optimal, and the patient immediately began to do significantly better with pulse oxes going up into the 90s. So those are things you're gonna run into. They're going to be uncomfortable. They're going to be immediate, right in your face, and it's important that you know what you have confidence what you know. You can stand back and take your breath and assess the situation. But it's important to just not be a placeholder. To just not go in and chart and fill in numbers. You're a clinician, you're trained, you're good at what you do. Patient needs you. You make an observation, whether something like this, or you see a chart where, patient might be coming off VV ECMO support the next day and have hypophosphatemia or hemoglobin of 7.5. And you just address, say, maybe this is not quite optimal for this patient, and bring it up. So be a clinician always, and don't be, I don't want to say afraid is not quite the right. Don't be timid about addressing these situations in a place where you're new, no one knows you. It's okay. You'll be appreciated, and good work gets respect. And that matters a lot, as you will be there over the next weeks or months. That respect will go a long way into how you can potentially manage your patients better, because the staff has more confidence in you. They're listening to what you say, and they're more on board with any ideas or anything you have to present. So that's very important. Third thing I like to bring up is, as you're traveling, locum tenens is difficult work. You're alone, you're on the road, you're by yourself, is to create good habits. It's really important. And I didn't appreciate this until a couple of months into what I was doing. When you're alone in a hotel room, maybe you have a day off, or you've got a shift change or something. It's really important to create good habits, to keep yourself healthy, to keep yourself in tune with everything you need, which means good sleep if you can, hopefully, getting that quiet room in a hotel, asking for a quiet room with not the room next to the pool, asking for a dark room, which I always ask for. I want a room on the north side of the hotel that's dark and quiet, and so I can get my rest during the daytime, because I'm always working night shifts. So sleep, diet, eat well. You can easily binge on bad food. Don't. Keep yourself healthy. Exercise is very important, or whatever activities you can create, whether you read or run or go to the gym, ride a bike, whatever. Keep those habits up, because that keeps you healthy. It keeps your mind healthy. And it's really critical when you're on the road. Keep up good habits. It'll make your work easier. It'll make you much happier. And you're doing something positive, even though you're away from home. Make sure you call home, touch base with your family and your loved ones, and always be in contact that way as well. So that's important. When I go in every shift, I have my habits that I do before every shift that gets me prepared to be successful for that shift. Whether it's the way I put things in my bag that I take with me, or every day before a shift, when in my Uber, my Lyft, there are 3 songs that I listen to before every shift. And as part of my routine of going in and setting myself up to be successful for that shift, for that day, knowing I'm going to encounter possibly some unusual, very difficult situations, and it just sets me up. And so it's part of my habit. So create a good habit for yourself for going in and having successful shifts and being successful every day. I also say a prayer, or I say words for my staff every day before I go in. It's just a short something that I do for myself, but it's for my patient, my staff, my doctors, and a little bit for me, that everybody has a successful night, that things progress, and that people can have the ability to be their best, and that I can be a part of that, which is a blessing. So the other part is a little bit of what Shannon was talking about, was the business end of things, and I guess I can maybe leave on a little bit of that. First of all, I'm not. Whatever you do when you decide to branch off and do this, whether you decide to set up as a locums, as an LLC, or as a W-2, or a 1099 basis, consult your accountant first. That's very important, because your expectations might be and end up at the end of the year, when you get some tax bills from your state or your county, that they end up being B, C, and D that you didn't expect. For example, when you set up in Virginia, when you set up as an LLC, you set up as a corporation, and you decide, this is great, it's going to be terrific, I'm going to buy a new computer, I'm going to buy a new desk, a new furniture for my office, it's going to be in my house. And so you spend, $4,000 or $5,000, $6,000 on everything you need to get yourself set up for your new endeavor. And it's fabulous. And you have this nice looking office and terrific room. And then you realize, when you get a bill from one of the counties in Virginia, that everything you submit to the state goes to the county, and the county knows that you now have a business, and everything you just bought is taxable and is depreciated over their depreciation rate. And suddenly you get a tax bill for personal property tax as a business owner for items that you bought for your office, and you thought were just applicable. We have federally, yes, but you can get a hit with it with taxes that you don't see coming. So think about those things. Consult your accountant and make sure that as you set something up, you're aware of financial hits down the line that you might incur. So let's see. I think that's kind of what I have to say.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shannon and Tim. Really insightful information you guys have presented. So we really appreciate you taking the time today and sharing this with our audience today. We will begin our Q&A session now. Everything again, per opening of the discussions, we're going to do it through the Q&A chat box. So please type in your questions. This is a topic, I think, specialty care has done a lot of webinars. I think over 20 or 30 webinars so far. I think this is one that's, been on our minds, right, for a lot of perfusionists, right? It's a topic that has been ongoing, especially through the pandemic. So please type in the questions. I think there's a lot of pros and cons here that we can discuss. So type in your questions. If you see a question in the chat box that you're really interested in it as well, give it a thumbs up so it moves up. So we'll begin our Q&A session now. Myself, Karen, and Chelsea will kind of moderate. We'll ask those questions that are in the chat box. And we'll start off with Chelsea, and Tim and Shannon will answer those questions for us.
All right. Thank you both for wonderful presentations. Our first question comes from Justin. He asks, what is the best way to obtain malpractice insurance if you plan on doing locums across multiple states?
Yeah, so I can answer a little bit to that. And insurance carriers, sometimes you can find a local insurance carrier that will take care of you. There are still national carriers that cover perfusionists. I just recommend reaching out to those carriers, which I think we all know well. So, they're pretty easy to find out if you ask around.
Okay.
Thank you, Tim.
So the next question is, there's not a name attached, I apologize, it says, how do you approach cookbook management of patients?
So I think that means it might be asking, thinking outside the box, possibly. Am I reading that the right way? I think cookbook management, which is probably, I think I understand that question. And I think that is, you approach each individual situation, each clinical situation separately, obviously. And sometimes you just have to present the idea of, hey, this might be thinking a little bit outside the box. But cookbook management might be, for example, a protocol of a certain amount of fentanyl per this patient's specifics, and you go to explain, well, we need to think outside the box because this patient is on extracorporeal life support, and so there's the dynamics of going on with the fentanyl and absorption, and try to explain that, and that's a non-cookbook. That's a cookbook going non-cookbook, I think, so type of discussion that's certainly appropriate to bring up.
Thanks, Tim. Another question we have online here is from Mark. A really interesting question. He believes that that the shortage is over because there are approximately 250 new graduates entering the profession every year. Should the schools cut their perfusionist enrollment in half? I know, Tim, you've been around for a very long time. Shannon, you've been in the profession for a while as a perfusionist, for a while in the clinical RN space. What are your thoughts on this?
Shannon?
Yeah, so I saw when I first became a nurse, there was we had a nursing shortage when I decided to become a nurse. And recently after I became a nurse, there was a decrease in patients in the inpatient setting, and there was talk of layoffs at the hospital in which I was working. And I remember I was working night shift, and as a new grad, I knew I would be first up should they start making cuts. And I remember being very, very worried and very, very afraid. And a very wise night shift charge nurse said to me, she said, "Don't worry, because what I've learned over these 30, 40 years of doing this is that everything is very cyclical. There will always be times when you need more staff. There will always be times when there are more patients. There will always be times when there are less patients." And the advice she gave me was, don't try to figure it out, because no matter what you think, something's going to happen and it's not going to be what you think. So um, I think that would have to be my answer with that, is that, I don't know what the answer to that question is, but I do believe that we are in unprecedented times, and anybody's best guess.
So I think that's the question is kind of referring to the pandemic and the massive need for clinical help during the pandemic. Well, that's over. So I think the perfusion schools are not basing their curriculum or their acceptances on pandemic numbers. I think that was, again, like Shannon said, things go in cycles. So if you're talking about purely need for perfusionists, I doubt that there's a need to change any structure in how many perfusionists they accept. We'll have the same amount of, the patients or perfusionists retiring or maybe leaving the profession because of COVID. But the COVID end of things is going to cycle out. Now, if you're talking about ECMO support, now that's a different question. So that's a different question. So I'm not going to go there. But for schools, I don't necessarily see the need to change any school curriculum because of COVID. They didn't. I don't believe they began increasing numbers. Maybe they did, and I missed that. But I don't believe that was the case. I know there was specialists that were being trained, but that's separate from perfusion training. So I think the answer to that question is I don't think schools base the students they took in on pandemic needs. If they did, then yeah, they would need to cut back. But I don't believe that they did. So I would say that's probably not a need for that.
I just want to follow up to that. Sorry, I just want to follow up. Someone asked a good question that kind of relates to this, but how do you stay marketable so that you always know you have a place out there and earn an income?
Do good
with
work.
Ups and downs.
Do good work. Go out there and do what you're trained to do and do good work. Your work speaks for itself. I mean, I'm not a marketing person. I do good work and keep looking. It's hard. It's not easy. You have to contact people. You have to make relationships. You have to build friendships. You have to build trust. And you build trust by doing good work. So number one, do good work.
Great. Thank you, Tim.
All right. Thank you both for that. It looks like the next question is from Lisa. I'm not sure who would like to answer. It says, what is the range of pay for per diem as either a perfusionist pumping cases or in the OR versus sitting ECMO?
I can't really comment on I never talk about pay, so I'm not going to start now. I think that it varies from situation to situation, and you have to jump in and find out for yourself. It can be you can do well, but you work a lot and you are away from home, and it ain't easy.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.
I'm not
Truthful
being
answer there.
evasive, but I think that there is a lot of variation in that, and it's an important question. But I think those are situations that different companies, different situations, different individual situations bring different deals.
Thanks, Tim. Next question is from Kishore. He says, how do you keep your competitors at bay and how you make yourself more employable? So, again, this kind of goes back to the question we had earlier, right? There's a lot of, we've seen through the pandemic, we've seen a lot of individuals, not just in the perfusion industry, right? But even in other healthcare industries, especially when you look at respiratory therapy and nursing, a lot of people have gone to the per diem type employment versus full-time employment. So, to go along with this question, there's a lot of perfusion schools that are opening up, right? There's multiple schools that are opening up. So, from all my research that I've done, right, I think over the next 2 years, right, the need for PRN perfusionists, per diem perfusionists is really going to drop down compared to what we've seen in the last 2 years. So, Tim and Shannon, how would you answer that question as far as, how do you keep your competitors at bay and how do you make yourself more employable? Some of the important factors and variables, Tim, that you alluded to, right, is doing good work, right? Is that the motivation that you see today in people that go from full-time to part-time, or is it more the compensation that's more of a reason why people go to a PRN situation?
So I think it's compensation pulls a lot of people in. I think it works best if you really have a passion for what you do. You love what you do. That doesn't necessarily always equate to dollars. And it's not, I'm not, saying that like that's automatically going to make the equation go in your favor, but I think it sure helps in the long run because it affects your attitude and that those just show up over time. And as things do begin to filter down and maybe there's less work, there are other, the amount of equipment for cardio helps and ECMO support. If you take away the pandemic, I'm not so sure it's not on I doubt it's on a decline. So it was on a rise before the pandemic. Pandemic was an anomaly. It's probably still on the increase. A lot of hospitals have seen efficacy of ECMO support and are embracing it and are getting leadership that buys into it, which you absolutely need to start anything. So that should still be on the rise. You have to talk to the companies, specifically, but what I understand is still is on the rise. Cardiac congestive heart failure is huge business. And sometimes that's going to mean ECMO support before transplant. So I think that they're still embracing it and that is continuing to rise. And again, you do good work and eventually it might come down to, do I want to ask this person or this person, who am I going to pick up the phone and call? And sometimes that is determined by your individual effort and how you have the reputation you've attained by the work that you've done.
Thank you. Shannon, any comments?
No, I think Tim hit the nail on the head, but I myself, and it seems like a few other people have a very pressing question. And we need to know, Tim, what 3 songs do you listen to on the way into work? Especially on a night shift.
I can tell you that, but it would be at the end of a really expensive dinner that I would not be buying, and it would be in total confidence. So another time and another place, I might share that with you. I will say that they go back to my childhood and they're all from the same artist.
Oh, all right. Oh, thank you.
Another question we have, I'll direct it at you for Shannon, is how do you get used to when you go to a new place? How do you get used to the setup and the people? Do you have any specifics for getting more comfortable with the whole setup?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I myself, I've never gone to a new space. I had the experience of rotating through several different hospitals in perfusion school, and I found that to be, incredibly difficult. And it certainly took me several weeks to acclimate to that setting. I've always marveled at, the traveling perfusionist. And when I was working full time as a perfusionist, I definitely felt the relief and was so thankful to work with these people. And as I watched them work, I just marveled because somehow they're able to just pick up on it. And as we were preparing for this presentation, it's something that I asked him. I said, how do you do that? Because, every place, they have their own protocol, they have their own culture, they have their own way of doing things. Their pump room is organized a different way, right? So how do you do that? But for me, I'm not too sure. Tim, do you, or Curdy or Karen, have you gone to other institutions?
Sure. So, yeah, and you can absolutely, if you do this, and if you do ECMO support, and just like if you're in the operating room, sometimes you'll encounter a pump setup that is like, wow, really counterintuitive and doesn't really is very complicated, but it makes sense to the owners of that OR and that work area there. So that's their setup. You just have to adapt to it. I've encountered very unusual setups that don't make a lot of sense, but they work, they function. You just scratch your head sometimes. And for example, I encountered a setup that had to have used 30 feet of tubing for ECMO support, and it just worked. And you go with it, and you figure out oh craps, what do I do if this happens? And you just have to sit and think to yourself, work through it. In an emergency, what are you going to do? And figure that out. But yeah, you will definitely encounter some very unusual situations and some unusual setups for sure. But accept what you have, because you're not going to change it. So you have to learn it and go with it.
Thanks, Tim. So we have a question here. We have actually like 7 thumbs up on this one. So I'm gonna ask this question here, but this is from Mary Jo. She's asking a question. Do you think full-time employers, again, this could be related to specialty care, it could be related to any outsourced organization that's out there, hospitals, right? Will they ever entertain the idea of hiring more part-time perfusionists to allow for a more balanced life for younger perfusionists who desire more family time, and older perfusionists as an alternative to complete their retirement? So it's a really good question, right? So, I mean, before I kind of toss it to Tim and Shannon, as a leader in an organization such as specialty care, this is something that absolutely, right? If there's enough people that we have in this organization, or any organization that are willing to work part-time, ultimate goal is to how do we make our associates' lives easier, right? Give them more work-life balance. That's the ultimate goal for anyone, right? So the problem is a lot of times you don't have the number of people that want to be part-time, right? If I had an account where I needed 4 full-time perfusionists, I would need 8 part-time perfusionists available, and we just don't have that supply at the moment. So it's very difficult to do that, but would it be possible? Absolutely. If we had the number of perfusionists that are available, again, you're doubling the number of perfusionists you would need to be able to accommodate that structure. So that's just my kind of take on that, but I'm going to kind of open it up to Tim and Shannon to kind of comment on that.
Shannon, you want to field that one?
Sure. So, I mean, I've often thought of that question myself. It just, well, why not go, part-time? Why are those positions not available? Because before I became a perfusionist, we were seeing that trend in nursing as well. Nursing wanting to go part-time, not having to do, a lot of the 12-hour overnights or, mandates that came along with being a full-time employee. But then I thought to myself, well, what does that look like from a business perspective? And this is me kind of just thinking out loud here, but I know that when I was a nurse, there were different benefit packages for full-time versus part-time employees. You know, from a business perspective, what does that look like, right? And then two, what kind of requirements do you hold them to? Are part-time perfusionists still responsible for taking call, right? Do they take half the amount of call, or do they take the full amount of call? So those are the things that kind of come to my head when I start to think of that, is how, like, along the lines of what Curdy was saying, how do we make this work, right? And I think that Curdy brings up an excellent point, is that you almost have to pair two part-time employees together in a sense. Tim, what do you think?
So I kind of think of this sort of in the physics, though, with the law of entropy, where something grows, it gets more complex, right? And more chaotic sometimes, right? So I probably, again, you brought up a great point from a business point of view. If you go to and you begin hiring part-time individuals, it does sound like a great idea. But if now you start hiring part-time individuals, you have to structure their package differently. And then you have to, then it becomes more people, means scheduling complexity goes up a factor of probably more than 1 to 1. And then you've got different personalities for the manager to manage, which probably goes up exponentially when you add every 1 or 2 part-time individuals. Now you've got those individuals who have their own, you know, bring their own stuff to the table, and that becomes more for a manager to manage. And then now the manager is complaining because he's got to manage the part-time people. So from a business point of view, I can see from hospital administrators, boy, it's a great idea. This is going to be a huge headache for us, but not a bad idea. Do you know what I mean? Curdy, can you see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we got about a couple of minutes here. We'll take, Chelsea, we'll do one more question, I think, and then we'll wrap this up.
All right, so let's see. So Mark asked, do you think the perfusion profession will ever agree to the N+1 model, even in call hours? His example is UPMC Pittsburgh has a backup aortic dissection call. What do you think?
I guess, how much are you going to pay for the N+1 model? I mean, how's that going to get reimbursed, and how is that going to work out for that? It would be great. I love that model. Shannon, do you have any thoughts on that? It comes down to compensation, I think, if they're willing to pay, and if that person is willing to accept that.
So I'm not too familiar with the N+1 model. Tim, can you give me a real quick synopsis of it?
Curdy, how about if you explain that better from a business point of view?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, you know, that's one of the things, if, you know, a lot of us, you know, in AMSEC with this, these are something that was shared recently. We had multiple webinars that was open to the perfusion community to provide input, right, about revising our standards and guidelines through AMSEC. And one of the proposals that is out there that was open for feedback was changing the standards, right? We have two words in our standards and guidelines, one that says should, right, that you should, and one that says you shall, right? So right now, as the standards and guidelines stands, it should you provide, you know, you should provide an N+1 model. That means if there's a perfusionist doing a case, should you have another person available in the building, right? And so some of the discussions that are going on currently, and we had these discussions last year, we had multiple webinars through AMSEC, you know, do we make this a standard, right? Do we make this you shall, right? What are the challenges to that, right? Yeah, patient safety, obviously, always important to all of us, right? But what are the challenges it brings as far as staffing, right? We're already in an industry and facing challenges and just filling positions that are just currently open, right? So how do we combat that? So it's really a tough and challenging question to answer.
Oh, of course. And, you know, and that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure. We did discuss this briefly in the AMSEC Leadership Symposium. And something that I thought of was, well, it very much depends on the state in which you're working, right? Because some states do have different requirements than others. Some, you know, require that there be an N+1, right? While others do not. So I definitely understand, you know, how difficult it is from a management perspective, a finance perspective, a pure staffing numbers perspective. But then, of course, we have to consider the state regulations and, of course, put patient safety, above all.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to wrap this up. Thank you. This concludes our webinar. I just want to thank our all the attendees that took the time to be part of this session. I also want to thank Shannon and Tim for sharing their experience with us. I really appreciate that. I think there was, really good. I also want to share with you our next webinar speaker, again, Chelsea Capone, who is one of our moderators today. She's going to be one of the presenters for our next webinar, along with Alexander Hank. This is going to be a very interesting conversation and pro-con debate on modified ultrafiltration. So please make sure that you do sign up. Keep an eye out for this announcement when it's going to be. It will be next month. Make sure you register. So again, thank you for all the attendees to be present. If you have any questions, again, emails are up there. Please email any one of us if you need anything. Again, this will be posted on YouTube in the very near future. Please make sure you complete the surveys that will be sent for this webinar. We always look at that information very closely, add new topics, invite new speakers. So I appreciate everybody joining us tonight. This concludes the webinar. Have a very pleasant evening and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.